this is the C120 12 volt battery system, kind of what's there and how it works and what the logic is. And I'm just gonna make a quick sketch here, man, to kind of show you how this thing works. So
right.
This is gonna be a quick drawing of this boat, and we gotta have draw it as a catamaran, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is our bulkhead here where we come in, and the engine is in here, engine there. Okay, underneath the quarter berth, not the quarter berth, but the queen bed here, these are split cushions here, and there's this wonderful space, and we'll get in there and show you a picture of that pretty quick. But right underneath that is a area that's got 3 batteries in it, okay? One of them is a start battery, one of them is a house battery, and one of them is the generator battery, okay? Mm-hmm. And then the other batteries are up in the master stateroom here. Underneath the floor in this master stateroom are removable floorboards. And there's 4 golf cart batteries in here that are paired together to make 12 volts. Mm-hmm. And then there's one group 27 battery, and this is for the electronics, okay? Mm-hmm. And these are your house battery banks here. All right, and the idea is that, and these of course are paired, this house is paired through the in the inverter zone here over to the house battery bank here. And then from the house battery bank, the power comes up to the distribution panel that's up here at the dash, just right over there, and it breaks out to other places. The reason that we have one house battery back here underneath the queen berth is that it's closer to that big stern thruster motor here. Mm-hmm. That lets you thruster back and forth, and it's got a connection back to that. So, because that thing draws like 4 horsepower, having a battery near it, even though it's going to pull a lot of power through the big cables that are here, and you don't have to do it, but I want that thing to run at full capacity. Mm-hmm. So that's where the batteries are at. So 1 house battery here, 4 golf cart batteries up here. All these batteries, because they're in areas that aren't that ventilated, have to be and are AGM batteries, so it's a sealed battery bank. Mm-hmm. And the reason we have a separate battery for the electronics is that, this is actually, it gets powered through, I'll just kind of draw it here a little bigger, but there's a voltage sensitive relay here, a little computer that basically, once the voltage gets above 12.7 on the house battery bank, then it latches across and it charges the electronics. Mm. And the electronic loads up at the dash are coming out of that battery. And the idea is that when you're thrustering, you can, because they're such large motors, momentarily you can drop the house battery banks below the 10.5 volts that the computers for the electronics want. So these basically, whenever you turn on the thrusters, it separates this switch here, so it can't work, and essentially the electronics are running off of that group 27 battery, and they'll run for a long time on that. But as soon as you stop thrustering, after about 1 minute, the computer lets it switch back on. It pairs on with the house battery bank. The engine actually has, and everybody orders it, it's a second alternator. So the engine comes with 1 Volvo alternator, 115 amps, and then Aspen orders it with a second 115 amp. So the first one runs the engine, and it's dedicated to the engine start battery and to running the engine stuff. And then the second one is dedicated to charge these house battery banks. Mm-hmm. And once the engine start battery is full, above 12.7, it also has a voltage sensitive relay here that pairs it up to the house battery and lets both alternators charge your house. So if you anchor overnight, you start your engine, as soon as the engine start battery gets up to voltage, anything above 12.7, then the computer pairs it together, and now you've got 230 amps charging your house battery. So that's a real nice system to have.
Yeah.
And it also means that neither alternator, just one alternator, is not going to work so hard. Some of the boats will only have a single 115 amp alternator, and they're replacing them occasionally. And you know, to me, it's better just to buy the bigger alternator, an extra one at the beginning, and neither one of them have to work that hard in that environment. So not a very good drawing, but you know, it gives you an idea of
yeah.
basically what's happening here. And the battery charger for the this is an inverter here, and it's a Magnum. Bad drawing, but it's a 2,000 watt Magnum inverter here, and it puts 100 amps when you're plugged into shore power, puts 100 amps into the house battery bank. So lots of power there to charge it up.
Yep.
But then the other little battery charger we talked about is down in this room here, and it has two leads. One of them goes to the start, the other one goes to the generator and charges that up. This generator battery is not connected in any way other than the battery charger to the rest of the system. And so if you ever get to the point where you've accidentally flattened your house battery banks and your start battery, you know, like you accidentally left the parallel switch on, and then you left your refrigerator on, and then you forgot to turn on the shore power breaker. We've had owners do that. Then your backup option is to take your jumper cables, which you should have some
and
with
bring
you,
over to the
and jump
genset.
from the generator battery over to the start battery, and that'll get you started.
On the alternators, yeah.
And once it's running, then it will go. And the thing to be kind of aware of is that if the voltage gets below about 10.5 volts, nothing works anymore. These all have computers in them. Even the alternators have. If they don't see any voltage to them, you know, if they get below 10.5, the computer doesn't work. It won't even charge, and the inverter won't charge, and this battery charger won't charge. So you're really stuck if you get below 10.5 volts. You're sort of like, I have trouble here, and it's super frustrating. And again, I have owners that. Well, the other thing that'll happen is they'll plug into shore power, leave the boat, they do everything right, and then the marina loaned the slip out next to them, and a new guy came in, unplugs their shore power cord, and plugs in his shore power cord, and then leaves their cord laying on the dock. So kind of frustrating. But that's just an overview. So again, basically your house loads come out of your house battery bank, and the AGM batteries. The other thing to kind of know is that if this is a battery when it's full, let's just say that that's full, and with no charge on it, it's resting at 12.7 volts. A new battery rests at about 12.7, 12.8, okay? When you get down to 11.7 volts, you're at about half a charge. You've used half the capacity. So if you're going to use the voltage as a way to tell how much energy is left, you know, just 11.7. If you get down to, say, 11.2, then you're basically 80% empty, or you're 3/4 of the way empty. Okay, you never want to go. That's kind of a scary range. If you always recharge when you're at 11.7 or above, then the batteries will last a really long time. But I have a few owners that constantly run their batteries really low. They don't manage that very well. And they don't think about, so again, we talked about this before, but voltage is your pressure, which is kind of cool, but your work, if you will, so think of it like a garden hose. So a garden hose that's got 60 PSI is going to spray, say 4 feet, okay? But if it's only a tiny little 1/4 inch hose, you're not going to get much work through it. The work is basically how much, let's say a 3/4 inch hose, and it'll spray it 4 feet. So, this is say a 1/4 inch hose. So you basically, how much water you're going to get is dependent on how many amps you're drawing. So the amps is the work. And so if you're only showing that you're pulling 1 amp, that's not a lot of work. But if it's pulling, 20 amps, yeah, that's pretty good work, okay?
Yeah, like we saw when you turned on the water heater.
Right. Yeah, then that brought, in 110 volts, that brought it up to,
17, 18.
18 amps, yeah, exactly. So this is at 12 volts. So these thrusters in 12 volts are pulling about 200 amps. Okay. So, you know, that takes really big cable to carry that much amperage. So, got a little diagram that kind of shows how, you know, voltage and amperage kind of work together to give you an idea of what your wattage is. So, the top of this triangle is watts, and then the left side is amps, the right side is volts. So, watts, if you're trying to solve for watts, basically it's amps times volts equals watts. Okay, and if you're trying to figure out how many amperage, you know, what's your amperage draw, it's watts divided by volts will give you how many amps. And if you're trying to figure, you know, just what the voltage is and all you have is watts and amps, then it's watts divided by amps. Okay.
Okay.
So what we really care about is, you know, and I guess for the thruster, for instance, we know that it's running at 12.7 volts, and that it's drawing 200 amps. Okay, so in watts, so we're at volts times.
We're going to do the top one.
Yeah, so basically it's times. So in that case, that equals about 2,500 watts to run that thruster. To kind of share the thought process for how much battery capacity is actually in there. How big is your fuel tank for batteries, if you will? And so the way this thing works is you've got 4 golf cart batteries here. Each one is 200 amp hours, but it's at 6 volts. So, you know, basically it's half of that. So you got 200, 200, 200, which equals 800. You divide that by 2 because it's going to be 12 volts, the way we wired them up, which gives you 400 amp hours at 12 volts. And then we have another house battery that's back under the quarter berth or the queen berth, and it's 125. So our total amp hours in the batteries is 525 amp hours. But remember, at max we want to run those at about no lower than 70% of their capacity, and 70% of 525 is 369 amp hours. Okay, and then we go, okay, well, what are our loads here? And the biggest load you're going to have is a refrigerator that on a warm day will run about 5.5 amps, is its average draw, times 24 hours is 130 amp hours. The stereo, if you run it for, you know, 12 hours at 12 amps, is 170 amp hours. The lights and LED lights and things like that are not very high. They're only 5 amps. You're going to run those for 6 hours at night. You get another 30 amp hours there. Toilets and the sundry kind of things, fans, maybe another 20 amp hours. So there we would be in a 24-hour period using 350 amp hours. You can see how it matches up with the 369 amp hours that we have available. What I would typically do is when I'm using larger loads, I'll go ahead and just start the generator for a few hours. The other thing that people need to understand is that if the generator is on and you have a 100 amp hour charge going in from the generator, and you have 350 amp hours you're trying to replace, how long is it going to take to replace it?
3.5 hours.
3.5 hours. And that's the thing that most people don't understand, is that even with the generator on, when you're trying to recharge everything, if you only have a 100 amp charge, it's going to take 3.5 hours of the generator to do that. And alternatively, if you start up your engines, and if you remember there's 215 amp hour chargers there, equals 230, takes about 20 amp hours to run the boat, which leaves you 210 amp hours. If you're going to charge that 350 back up while you're cruising, you'll need to be cruising for about an hour and a half with the engine running. And you actually, if you wanted, could have the generator and the engine running, and you'd have 310 amp hours going in, and it will only take about an hour and 10 minutes if you run them both. So that's the kind of relationships that most people don't understand. I'll get a lot of folks that start their generator and they run it for 30 minutes and then they turn it off, and the voltage, you'll get a surface charge doing that, and it'll stay up for about 10 minutes and then it sinks back down real quickly. So to really actually fill your batteries back up, you sort of got to do a little bit of the math here.